Sensors. My name is Charles Barrett. I work with the University of Florida. I am a water resources agent. I spend a lot of my time focused on soil moisture sensors, irrigation, and nutrient management for crops. Uh, so, that being said, when I think about irrigation scheduling, I usually think about this image here on the left where we've got a generic crop, and as days after planting increases, the crop water demand increases to a certain point um, where the crop is harvested. So this is generally what we think of when we think of crop water need. Um, and so this is a good ballpark to get you in if you're thinking about irrigating a crop. It's based on historical data though, so it's only um, as accurate as historical data can be today. So today, every day is going to be a little bit different from the historical average, and so that's where I think the soil moisture sensors come in, and they can help um, fine tune this irrigation schedule from the historical to the present. And so that's what I'm going to focus on today is talking about using soil moisture sensors to fine tune irrigation schedules, and also a little bit about kind of some of the nitty gritty things that we can learn from these soil moisture sensors. And so first things first, I want to kind of cover one of the first questions that I get about sensors is, do they represent reality? Um, so I kind of dive in here and I show, like, on the left hand side of this uh, slide, you can see on this probe where each one of these sensors is at 4, 8, 12, 16, and 20 inches. Each one of these sensors is a line on the graph that the data is creating. So the data from this 4-inch sensor is graphed on this black line at 4 inches on our data display. Same thing with this red line at 8, the blue at 12, the yellow at 16, and the green line at 20. And so that's how it's installed in the soil, and that's how you see it on the data display with this particular vendor. And imagine as well that here's your roots, and this is 4 inches down, in your roots would be somewhere in here. So that's where this sensor is pulling this data from. And from these patterns, the stair-step pattern and other patterns that we see, like this spike in moisture, that I'll dive into what all this means as we go forward. Another point to make is that I'm talking about capacitance type probes today. Capacitance and TDR type probes read the data display comes out in volumetric water content, not tension. So I won't be talking about any sort of tension sensors today. Tension is basically the inverse of volumetric water content. And so an increase in moisture in volumetric water content, so an increase in moisture in the soil is an increase on my graph. And that's the only thing we have to keep in mind. If it was tension, it'd be the opposite. It would go down. So again, keeping on this same train of thought, does the sensor represent reality? I did a little test when I first started working with some of these sensors to see how close to reality these sensors um, were giving us information. What I did was I installed a soil moisture sensor here in the soil. I applied blue dye to the soil surface, and then I irrigated with 3 inches, 1.5 inches, and 3/4 of an inch to try to see how deep that water went. I measured it here on my soil moisture sensors, and then I also dug a hole and saw how deep the blue dye went. And so this is kind of ground truthing the sensor in reality. And what I saw was, you know, where my soil moisture sensors were at on this particular probe at 4 inches, 12 inches, 20 inches, 30 inches, and 36 inches. Notice that this is not the same as the graph I showed before. These sensors can be adjusted along the depth of that probe And so when I applied 3 inches of water, I got a spike in moisture all the way down here later on in time from 4 inches down to 36 inches, as you would expect. It takes some time for the moisture to get down there. But 3 inches of water applied went to 36 inches in depth. And so, conceptually, this makes sense because in our sandy soils here in Florida, we say that our water holding capacity is anywhere between 7/10 of an inch and 1 inch of water per foot. So if I applied 3 inches of water, that's water to fill up 3 feet, 3 inches to 3 feet, if it's a 1-to-1. So it makes sense that I had moisture down at 3 feet. When I applied 1.5 inches, it went to 20 inches. When I applied 3/4 of an inch, it went to 1 foot. And so if we can hold 7/10 of an inch in 1 foot of water, this makes sense. Let's look at the blue dye. The blue dye moves kind of like nitrogen would move in the soil. So 3 inches of water push that nitrogen down 20 inches. 1.5 inches of water push that nitrogen down 16 inches. And 3/4 of an inch of water pushed that nitrogen down around 12 inches here on this line. And so, yeah, the sensors make sense. As funny as it is to say, but it makes sense in reality. So this was my ground truth. It helped me feel more comfortable. I'm hoping it'll help you feel more comfortable too with understanding that these sensors, this data that we're getting, also makes sense in reality. So that being said, my next main thing is what I go around talking about to everybody is how to dive in and learn to read these lines. If we can learn to read these lines, there's a lot of information that we can get from soil moisture sensors. And even if we don't understand everything there is to know about soil moisture sensors, if I have a sensor installed in my field, somebody who knows more about these sensors can come and tell me about what they see on my graphs and help me understand better what's going on in my field. So I encourage you, if you don't have soil moisture sensors, to try one and see what you can learn from it. That's what I'm going to talk about here is, I can see clearly I've got roots at 4 inches. How? Well, during the day, I'm taking up water here. At night, it flatlines. The next day, I take up water again. At night, it flatlines. I know that this black line is at 4 inches, just like the very first sensor representation I showed with the graph with the sensors lined up with each one of the lines. At 4 inches in the morning when the sun comes up, it burns off the dew, and then the crop starts to take up water and lose water, and so we see this decrease in moisture at 4 inches. And then at night it stops, and then the next day the same thing happens. And the reason why this slope starts off gradual at first and then gets stronger and then it gets gradual again before it stops is this. Think about this as the intensity of the sunlight. In the morning, the intensity of the sun is not very intense, and then it gets more and more intense as the day goes on. Midday, it's maximum intensity, and then at night, as the sun sets, the intensity lessens and water loss from the plant slows down and stops. And so I can tell from looking at this graph that I have roots here at 4 inches. That's excellent information. So I don't want to irrigate past 4 inches. I don't want to leach nutrients past 4 inches. This last irrigation event here that went down to 8 inches may or may not have been too much. I can see just a little bit, maybe roots starting here at 8 inches. And I can definitely see it right here on this day, just starting to dive down before the irrigation came. And so I think that this was probably a good irrigation event, meaning that the moisture applied matched where I had roots. And so those are some take homes from learning to read the lines. Another thing I like to think about on this bottom graph here is this line is a sum of all of these lines up here. These 4 lines up here are added up here. So what's useful about this tool is I can say how much water was taken up total by the plant, by all of my roots, all of these lines this day. And then I can say, okay, how much water was taken up by all of my roots on this second day? And if these two amounts are different, which they are in this example, there could be some things going on. So one thing could be that this first day was really sunny. It was a sunnier day than this day. This day the clouds came in, and so we took up less water. That's a plausible explanation because that's exactly what we see. On cloudy days, we take up less water. Um, However, if these 2 days were the same, there wasn't a cloud in the sky either day, the temperatures were the same, everything was the same, then in a perfect world, the same amount of water would be taken up both days. Since it's not, what this tells me is that we're the the crop is taking up less water the second day because there's less water there to take up. And if this goes on for um, many more days, we could get into a drought stress situation for this crop, and that may or may not be a good thing for this crop. And so that's how we can start to learn when we need to trigger an irrigation event. We can watch how much water is being taken up and from where it's being taken up. And then we know how much water to apply. If I'm taking up a lot of water, like we'll see sometimes where this top line will flatline. There's no more water there for the crop to take up. So that down here on this red line and this blue line, the crop will start to take up more water. That tells me that it might be time to irrigate because I've depleted the moisture, the easy water for the plant to take up at 4 inches, and now I'm digging deeper. And depending on the crop and the stage of that crop, we may not want to stress the crop too much, and it might be time to irrigate. A good example of a lot of information, but when should we irrigate and how much we should irrigate is in this figure here, where I'll just walk you through kind of what I have pointed out, and then we'll get to that discussion of how much to irrigate and when. And so on this line, this arrow A up here, we see a big irrigation event, and it went really, really fast from 4 inches down to 8 inches, 12 inches, down to 16 inches. These lines are a different color, and they look a little different because this is a different soil moisture vendor, soil moisture sensor vendor. And so I'm just trying to expose you to more sensor types and output displays so that you get used to seeing this. All this data is very similar across all the platforms. Personally, I don't have a preference for any soil moisture sensor vendor, just as long as the data is high quality and we can use it to make irrigation decisions. Most of the time I say to my growers that if you're looking for a vendor, a soil moisture sensor vendor to use, go with one that you can trust. You know, somebody that's got a relationship, somebody that you have heard of, that's worked with a neighbor that they like or something like that. The reason why I say go with somebody that you can work with is because, you know, just like any other piece of technology, sometimes these things have hiccups and you want to be able to call them and have that sensor serviced and fixed. So anyway, that's a little bit of off topic, but this arrow A shows some really fast water movement down. This is a big heavy rainfall, and in Florida we'll say, we often hear, you know, we're never more than 3 or 4 days away from a drought, or sometimes 2 or 3 days away from a drought. And it's true, and this is why the soil doesn't hold on to a lot of water. That's why the water moves so quickly through it. And then between A and B here at 4 inches, we can see a root stair step here, 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 and then boom, we needed to irrigate. And so that was, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 days without irrigation, and we needed to irrigate. I just started to see maybe a little glimmer of roots showing up down here on 8 inches. It's much more clear here in time. 8 inches, I have roots. And so I would say that this irrigation event was spot on. We irrigated, we filled up the 4-inch root zone, and we supplied a little bit of moisture down here at the 8-inch root zone where our roots were starting to come in. And then this was probably a rainfall event that pushed water down past where we needed it. And then this would be another irrigation event here, this spike, where water was applied to 4, 8, and 12 inches. And as you notice, I have this little call out showing where we have root stair steps at 12 inches. And so this irrigation event was definitely adequate. And then later on in time, we have roots down here at 16 inches. And then we could, if this line started going down, 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 we could start to irrigate. We could increase our irrigation to supply water so that our 16-inch sensor doesn't deplete. And so what this shows is over time, our root system growing. We can see our stair steps here at 4 inches. We see it pop up here at 8 inches, down here at 12 inches, down here at 16 inches. And you can watch this throughout the season and see where your roots are at, see how deep your moisture was being applied, and adjust those run times, adjust that irrigation amount to match where your roots are at. That's how sensors can be used to irrigation schedule. And then I think I put this in here just to show folks that, you know, even for me at times, it looks like a bunch of wavy lines. It's not always clear. It doesn't, you know, you're not born understanding these things, and it does take some practice, and it does take some time sitting and thinking to figure these things out. But I can promise you that it's well worth sitting down and figuring out, or having somebody who understands these things sit down with you and help you take a look at it. And so what I'll do is kind of dive into this a little bit and show you what I see when I look at this. And the first thing that pops in my mind is, oh, I can see where this irrigation behavior was switched from 2 irrigation events to 3 irrigation events per day. And so here in these blue circles, you see 2 big peaks. That's 2 big irrigation events a day. And then over here in the green circles, we see 3 irrigation events, 3 smaller irrigation events per day. And so what happened was a colleague of mine got a phone call from a grower here. It was May 3rd, and the phone call was, hey, I'm gonna turn on the pivot to irrigate this watermelon crop because I can't get enough water out through my irrigation or through my drip irrigation. I'm irrigating twice a day, 2 hours each event, and it's not enough water. So I'm going to turn on the pivot. And my colleague said, don't do that. Let me look at your sensor data and I'll talk with Charles and we'll come up with another plan. But do not turn on your pivot. And the reason why not to turn on the pivot for the watermelons was because that was going to blow up a bunch of disease on that watermelon crop, and they would eventually lose the crop. And so the grower said, okay, I'll hold off, call me back when you come up with a plan. I looked at the sensors with Bob. We saw what she saw, which was they were getting behind. That's the slope of this line is going down, and it's headed straight for this red area where we're gonna run out of moisture. And when this call came in, it was, hey, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I'm seeing wilt. I'm seeing drought stress on my crop. I need help. And so the decision that Bob and I helped the grower make was to switch over to doing 3 1-hour events. So we cut off 1 whole hour of irrigation. That's 1 whole hour of diesel pumps not running, and saving water, saving diesel, saving money, but we increased a little bit the labor. You know, you have to go out and turn that irrigation valve on 1 more time. And so with this 3 1-hour irrigation events, you see that we flattened out this line. We took that stress off that crop. And so the grower called us up this very next day at 3 p.m. out in the field and said, "Hey, the wilt is gone, the drought stress is gone. You saved my crop. You saved me from having to turn the pivot on over top of these things and ruining the melons. Really appreciate it." And so, just by having that data available, even though this grower didn't really know 100% how to interpret the intricacies of this data, having it available and being able to call and get a consultation on it saved the crop. It saved that farmer a lot of headache in the future, and it turned out to be a really good watermelon year for the grower. And by being able to pick longer and go back for multiple harvests, they made a lot more money than they would have if they had turned on the pivot and had a bunch of disease in that watermelon. So um, I'll just say that even if you don't understand everything about these soil moisture sensors, there's people out there that do, that can help you understand more and really help make some smarter decisions. Um, it might not always be feasible to go from 2 irrigation events a day to 3 irrigation events a day. I understand that. And in the real world, we have things like labor issues, we have things, we have all kinds of things going on out in the field, but these sensors can give you the data to make the most informed decisions as possible. With that, I'll just wrap up. Um, this slide here shows where I'm working with county agents all throughout the state of Florida and up a little bit up into Georgia. I definitely recommend reaching out to your county agent if you have any questions about soil moisture sensors. If they don't feel comfortable, I'll gladly work with your county agent with you to understand these sensors better, and hopefully get a sensor out in your field. Or if you already have them, we'll take a look at what you got. If there's any way I can help or be helpful, please let me know. My contact information is here at the bottom of this slide. CE Barrett at the University of Florida.edu. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate everybody coming to the conference and getting information on this stuff. So thank you very much.